What is up? Welcome back to another PFF podcast. I am your host, Mike Renner, as always, and we have a special guest with us, someone who hasn't been on the podcast in quite some time, but we brought him on to discuss the PFF 50. It is Gordon McGinnis, the special teams leader here at PFF. Gordon, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I know Sam's away and Steve's been traveling a little bit, so it was time to bring me back into the fold.
Yeah, we got our two lead analysts taking a break in the off season, being lazy, no big deal. We're picking up the slack here though at PFF. Me and Gordon, we're gonna bring you over the last week. We've been revealing our 50 best players in the NFL as they stand right now. We're calling it the PFF 50, kind of taking on the NFL's top 100. Their list is awful, as we've seen. They have guys on there who didn't play last year. They have guys on there who, there's no rhyme or reason to their list. It's basically they don't really have a criterion for what they're actually selecting. We do. Our criteria was the fact that we are saying who is the best right now. So guys like J.J. Watt will be included on this list because we're assuming that they come back healthy. Right at this moment, who are the 50 best players in the NFL? And I'm going to go through them right here. I'm going to name them off so you guys have an idea. Go to our website. Sam Monson wrote them all up, but I'm just going to go through them here. Starting at number 50 and counting down. Fletcher Cox at 50, Devin McCourty, 49, Sean Lee, 48, Drew Brees, 47, Aqib Talib, Ezekiel Elliott, Greg Olsen, Geno Atkins, Kawan Short, Damon Harrison, Travis Kelce at 40, Brandon Graham, Malcolm Butler, Kalichi Osemele, Andrew Whitworth, Patrick Peterson, Zach Martin, Mike Evans, Ndamukong Suh, Bobby Wagner, Eric Weddle at 30 then, Richard Sherman, 29, AJ Green, 28, Joe Thomas, 27, Russell Wilson, 26, Andrew Luck, 25, Landon Collins, 24, Trent Williams, 23, Calais Campbell, 22, Tyron Smith, 21, Earl Thomas, 20, Matt Ryan, 19, Cameron Jordan, 18, Odell Beckham, 17, Travis Frederick, 16, David Johnson, 15, Chris Harris Jr., 14, Joey Bosa, 13, Marshall Yanda, 12, Le'Veon Bell, 11, Luke Kuechly, 10, Rob Gronkowski, 9, Antonio Brown, 8, Von Miller, 7, Khalil Mack, 6, and in the top 5, at number 5, we have Aaron Rodgers, then Julio Jones, then Tom Brady at number 3, and then number 1 and number 2, little different than we've had in the past. Number 2 is J.J. Watt, Aaron Donald, number 1. We flipped him this year. Aaron Donald, just a monster. J.J. Watt, little concerns with him coming back from an injury. So there you have it. There's the top 50. That was a mouthful to get through. Gordon, the question on everyone's mind is, what did we get wrong? Who is too high? Who is too low? I know we got some stuff wrong because you guys said it, but Colin Cowherd said best list in the NFL earlier this week. So what do you think we missed, though, Gordon? Who would you have placed differently?
You know what? I think we might have been a little bit generous to some of the guys coming back or some of the guys who have have had some pretty serious injuries. J.J. Watt, if he is fully healthy, is completely dominant, is going to destroy offensive linemen in the NFL next year. But that's a pretty serious injury he's coming back from. Then you look at Rob Gronkowski at number 9. Gronkowski, we know, when healthy, completely dominant, but there's been some injuries there throughout the years that have really held him back, and definitely held him back last year. And then Luke Kuechly had the concussion problem. That's the thing that you always worry about coming back and being a problem going forward. So I think 3 guys in our top 10 who, have some pretty serious injury issues there. And I think that's something that we were a little bit lenient on.
No, I can agree with that. Injuries, like I said, I kind of assumed they come back to where they were. But that's not always the case. We saw I think we had Tyrann Mathieu much higher a season ago than we did this year. He didn't even make our PFF 50 this year because of when he came back, he just wasn't, he wasn't the same guy we saw before that. He had the injuries played a part in him, and he graded out as an average, cornerback this year for us. So that's why he dropped out of the 50. So, yeah, I can see how I'd be wary of guys actually coming back to full health. But the guys I think that we went too high on were the guys who were small sample sizes, had some elite play this past season, but we've just seen so little of it to know if it's the real deal or if they're going to, come back to earth next season. Guys like Joey Bosa, all the way at number 13. Yes, he was unbelievable as a rookie. Some of the best play we've ever seen from an edge defender as a rookie, but we're putting him over guys like Cameron Jordan, Brandon Graham, who have done this year in and year out. We put him just only a handful of spots behind Von Miller. I'm not ready to put Bosa in that conversation just yet. some other guys that had small sample sizes. Landon Collins was so bad as a rookie, completely changed in year 2. But he still could be in between that. He's not necessarily what we saw this past year. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to continue that. Still a small sample size. And then Travis Kelce as well. Only really came on strong at the end of the year, but was featured incredibly heavily down the stretch. I'm not sure we're gonna see that from him year in and year out. Even though they did cut Jeremy Maclin, he will be featured in that offense. I'm not sure I'm ready to put him above Greg Olsen.
And I get that as well from you. I think Landon Collins is a genuine defensive player of the year candidate coming into this year.
Oh no, I said he should have been. I said he should have been last year. Like, he was unbelievable last year. But it's still, even a 16-game sample size in the NFL is still a very small sample size.
Absolutely. And as you said, the rookie year was so bad that to get there to get from that to what we got last year, such a big difference that, even if he lands somewhere in the middle next year, at that point, he's going to be a top 10 or so safety, but not necessarily the difference maker he was this past year. So I can absolutely see why that potentially has him a little bit too high there.
Who would you say, though? So we hit the guys that we thought were too high, and we mentioned injury concerns, small sample sizes. Who is too low for you on this list? Who in the 50 would you say, no, that's still too low, even though they made the 50? I want them to be higher, and they really deserve to be at this point.
For me, there's 2 cornerbacks I think we were a little bit harsh on. Chris Harris Jr. has become the model of consistency among the elite cornerbacks in the NFL. Does such a tremendous job year in, year out. Last year was arguably his best season. He's still only going to I think he turns 28 in about 5 days' time or something like that, so he's still young. It's not as if we've got any concern that he's over the hill and he's about to see his play drop off the cliff. And then Patrick Peterson, a guy who, in the past was a little bit more inconsistent, but there was I think there was the problem with diabetes that he, got that in check. And since then, he's been a phenomenal cornerback again. And we know, as a stat that you've put out in the past, he tracks wide receivers. And I think that has a ton of value as well. So I think we're a little bit low on Peterson as well.
No, it's incredible that Patrick Peterson tracked more number 1 wide receivers than anyone else last year in the NFL, yet was still targeted at the lowest rate of any cornerback in the NFL. So he's guarding your best receiver, and he's making you shy away from it. So that has incredible value, even if he's not consistently among the league leaders in pass breakups, among league leaders in interceptions. Just the fact that he's denying receptions to number 1 receivers has a ton of value. And the coverages they play, I wrote about this last week in an article, they alter their coverages basically knowing that, hey, Patrick Peterson's going to he's going to lock down his side of the field. Similar to what Seattle does with, their safeties, rotating away from Richard Sherman. They know that they can give their other corners help there in Arizona, and Patrick Peterson's going to handle his business. So I agree. 35 for him. I'd put him, fringe top 10. He should be in the teens for me. So I definitely agree at cornerback there. I think he to me should be around where Chris Harris is. I'm not sure I'm ready to call Chris Harris underrated because of the 13 players ahead of them, I'm not sure he has really an argument to be who I'd switch him out with. All those guys are dominant players there. And, all these 50 guys are very, very good players. So we're splitting hairs here to some degree. But I'd put Patrick Peterson around where Chris Harris ended up at number 14 overall.
Yeah, I definitely entirely agree with Peterson being up that high. I mean, as you said there, all the level he can cover number 1 receivers at, and just the fact that he's a playmaker as well. I think that's an underrated thing with Patrick Peterson that has almost been lost a little bit in the last couple of years. He's a guy that can make plays on the ball as well, so that's always going to be key.
And one guy I also want to touch on as being too low, and I kind of hit on it with the Joey Bosa talk. I would switch where Brandon Graham is at number 39 overall with where Joey Bosa is at number 13. I think those two are just in the wrong positions. Brandon Graham has done it every single year of his career, basically, at this point. And what he did a season ago, what that defensive line did for the Philadelphia Eagles, they had at one point in the season a fairly good pass defense with one of the worst, cornerback units in the NFL. They had basically the Packers secondary, yet were still putting up, one of the worst secondaries in the NFL, yet still had a very good pass defense because that front 4 was getting consistent pressure, snap after snap after snap, only rushing 4. They dropped, I think they had one of the bottom 3 blitz percentages in the NFL. They were rushing 4 time after time because they knew guys like Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham were going to get home, and Graham consistently did. I didn't see a guy who was more unblockable in more games than Brandon Graham a season ago. Von Miller and Khalil Mack will have their dominant performances against guys who, shouldn't be on NFL fields, but Brandon Graham was dominating guys who were not not poor tackles. He was dominating guys like Doug Free, some other tackles across the NFL. He was just owning. So him at 39, still a little too low for me. I love Brandon Graham's game. I said when I did the Dream Team last week that I'd put him on my Dream Team above someone like Von Miller because I trust him more to get consistent pressure against an elite tackle than a Von Miller. That's just my opinion because he's Brandon Graham, to me, the best bull rusher in the NFL. So I'd put him higher if it was my top 50.
The crazy thing with Brandon Graham, though, is that for as much pressure as he gets, and you can look across his career, he is consistently, on a low sample size, on a higher sample size, he consistently gets pressure. But he consistently doesn't turn that pressure into sacks.
Yes.
Throughout this point in his career, hasn't had a season where he's had more than 7 sacks. And it's just such an interesting thing to see. We see guys in the NFL who one year they'll have a lot of pressure and they convert it into sacks. The next year, maybe not so much. Or guys who have 15, 16 sacks don't really back up with a ton of pressure. For him, over the course of his career, to consistently get as much pressure as he gets but not finish is just... It's either one of the strangest anomalies in certainly since we've been grading, or it's just something that he just doesn't consistently do.
Well, it's very similar to Michael Bennett for the Seattle Seahawks. They don't really win in similar ways, but I think they both have low sack rates because they're not exceptionally bendy sort of players who are going to kind of sneak up on a quarterback. They're bull rushing. They're coming right through an offensive lineman, so they're not really sneaking up on a QB, and then they don't have that quickness, that change of direction to finish a play. So Michael Bennett over the course of career has just not been a high sack guy. I think only one double-digit sack season in his career. That came in 2015. Brandon Graham similarly has not had a 1 year where he had double-digit sacks, I don't believe. And yet I still would take him above, guys who do get double-digit sacks year in and year out. Someone like Vic Beasley for the Atlanta Falcons. He's the guy who will disappear for a game but then get 2 sacks because he can actually chase down a quarterback. Give me Brandon Graham, the guy who's going to be consistently pushing the pocket. So, in my opinion, I don't give a damn about the sack numbers. I've said that before. He only has 29 for his entire career, but he's been a much better player than those numbers tell me.
And I'm not going to disagree with his ability as a pass rusher. It just is one of the most interesting stats for me that just, he doesn't quite manage to finish. But there's no denying that last year in particular, in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback, he was up there with the best in the NFL.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now we've named the 50 guys. We've obviously forgotten about people. We had a lot of Eric Berry on Twitter when we were doing this. We had a lot of Marcus Peters. A lot of people thought we hated the Chiefs after we came out with this list. Guys, we don't hate the Chiefs. We're not biased against any of your teams. But who, Gordon, outside of the top 50, do you think was the biggest snub that you thought deserved to be on this list?
Peters is the guy, when we were on the call talking about it, I was banging the table for Peters to make the top 50. I was shot down by you, by Sam, and I understand the argument against him. His rookie year and his second year in the NFL, he does give up some plays downfield. His rookie year gave up a ton of yardage, dropped that significantly in his second year, but still gave up a little bit too much. But there isn't a better playmaker at cornerback in the NFL. We had a stat come out in the last couple of days, the Playmaker Index that we tweeted out. In the last 2 years, he has broken up or intercepted 19% of the passes that have been thrown into his coverage. It's the most in the NFL of any cornerback at that point. And I understand the concerns with him. I understand he's going to get beat a little bit. But the fact that he can make plays, on the ball, and when he can create some big things for the defense, I just think has a ton of value.
I am going to just completely disagree with you on Marcus Peters. You have more of an argument with Eric Berry, in my opinion, because Eric Berry did it as a deep safety this year, who made it as an actual playmaker from the middle of the field more so than he's ever been in his career. Was a glorified, linebacker at some times there in Kansas City. Was fantastic this year in coverage. Has been fantastic over the last 2 seasons. It's just that the safety position is similar to the running back position where there's only going to be a handful that make this list because it's just hard to make impact from those positions, especially in our grading system. So between him and Devin McCourty, I think they're about on similar levels, so I could have seen an argument for him. But Marcus Peters, at the cornerback position, you just have to be consistent. You have to be stingy with your yardage. I don't want a guy making splash plays yet giving up splash plays on the other side of it, making the top 50 in this list. I'm fine with that on my team. I'm fine with, he's a good player. If there was a top 100, he'd definitely make that. But when you look at who he deserves to be over at the cornerback position here, we have Richard Sherman, Chris Harris, Patrick Peterson, Malcolm Butler, and Aqib Talib at 46 was the lowest corner. Does he deserve to be in over any of those guys, would you say?
Well, I think we're looking at this as a little bit of a projection and looking forward to next year as well. So I think when you take the fact that consistently over those 2 years he's been a playmaker, and from rookie year to second year he saw the yardage he allowed drop, I don't think it's really out with the realms of possibility that he's going to see another drop in yardage and still stay the same playmaker. And I think at that point, I think he's absolutely a top 50 player in the NFL.
God, we're just going to disagree. There was a cornerback that I would have. There was one cornerback that I could see an argument for because of his consistency over the course of his career and because of how just damn good he was last season, and it's Casey Hayward is the one who I would have argued for making this list. Casey Hayward came in as rookie year. It was one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen from a cornerback. Now I get that he was, a slot-only corner as a rookie, but he allowed a passer rating of 30.4 in his coverage that year, had 12 pass breakups, 6 interceptions. And then people kept asking after that, when does he get back to that level? Does he ever get back to that level? They tried, he got hurt, had hamstring issues the next 2 seasons. Then the third season in his fourth season in Green Bay, he finally got back out to a starting role. They started playing him at boundary corner, and he got a very bad rap because he got beat a handful of times on some big plays, but graded out extremely well in our system. We called him a must re-sign for the Packers. They passed on him. The rest of the NFL seemed to pass on him, signed a very team-friendly contract in San Diego a season ago. And then he started tracking number one receiver, started playing outside only, wasn't even a slot cornerback, only took 60 snaps in the slot a season ago, and had 7 interceptions, 9 pass breakups, a passer rating of 53.4 allowed against, was dominant for them. To me, there's a lot of talk about what he can't do. He proved all that wrong a season ago. I think he definitely belongs in that conversation with all the guys that I mentioned. Of those cornerbacks that made our list, Casey Hayward was right up with them a season ago, in my opinion.
Love Casey Hayward, love what he can do, and I can absolutely see the case for him in the top 50. I'm just going to turn it back to you, though, in terms of yards allowed. He allowed 11 more yards than Marcus Peters did last year, so I'm going to make that as my final case for Peters to be in there.
Casey Hayward, though, 6 touchdowns allowed in his entire career. Marcus Peters has, let me check it, 11 in a 2-year career already. So
again, I just don't want to kill him for that rookie year, but we're going to have to agree to disagree on that, clearly.
Okay. All right, agree to disagree. One more guy, though, that I want to give a shout-out to, who I want in the top 50, who I really wanted, and who, in my opinion, is a shoo-in for next season, is Jay Ajayi. When I watched pure running ability a season ago, no one was better, in my opinion, than Jay Ajayi in terms of just running the football. His game against the Steelers was the best single running performance I saw all year. Everyone was talking about how the offensive line must be better now because Jay Ajayi went for 200. It really wasn't. It was fine. It wasn't bad, but that was about as average an offensive line performance as I've seen in a running back go for a 200-yard game in my 5 years at PFF. He was unstoppable, runs hard, runs like his hair is on fire, snap after snap, has amazing vision on zone run plays. To me, he's a better runner than Ezekiel Elliott as a pure running back, right up there with any guy in the NFL as a pure running back. Doesn't have the receiving threat as some of those guys that made the top 50, but I would have liked to have seen him in that 45 range where Ezekiel Elliott was.
The really interesting thing with Ajayi is that he was a workhorse at Boise State. Had a ton of carries there, and the big concern with him, I remember coming into the NFL, was has he had too much tread on the tires in college. Comes into the NFL, only plays 164 snaps last year, in his rookie year, and then gets to play his second year. Really, we got to see him at full strength. Whether or not that helped him rejuvenate, or whether or not he'd have been that good as a rookie, I don't know. But as you said there, just had some hugely dominant performances last year, and I think absolutely is definitely going to be a guy that has a very high chance of making the top 50 next year. I think there's another lock. I think there's a guy who was borderline top 50 this year, and his performance as a rookie suggests that he absolutely is a shoe-in for next year, and that's Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints.
Ooh, okay.
A guy who...
I was going to go a different way with the lock for next year, but you continue.
Well, I mean, I just think when you look at what he did last year, Forced 20 missed tackles as a receiver. On slant routes in particular, he was just absolutely dominant. When you saw him get into the open field, he almost runs angry, and it just looks like an absolute nightmare for a defensive back. Once he gets the ball in his hands, once he's running downfield, it's so tough to stop. And I think he's going to have a huge year, especially now with Brandon Cooks with the New England Patriots. He's going to be the focal point of that New Orleans offense, I think, and I think he's in for a huge year.
No, I loved Thomas coming out. I couldn't believe when he ran a 5.7 40 at the combine, because to me he was so sudden in and out of his break. So sudden. He got on defensive back so quickly off of the line of scrimmage. To me, I thought he was a definite first-round talent, played like it as a rookie, and like you mentioned there, that New Orleans offense is tailor-made for him. He's a perfect fit there. That has helped him a lot. He's now the number one there, and he's going to put up some number one sort of receiver stats there. I bet he goes big, and yeah, I can see him being on this list next year. I think he was, like you said, borderline. He was in the 100. He would have made a top 100, but he'll likely make this list next year if he continues at the rate he's going. There were two other rookies, though, that I thought, just from what we saw, could end up making this list in next season. One was Jack Conklin. I get that he's a right tackle, and I get that he got help at Tennessee, but what we saw from him in the run game was what probably impressed me the most. Was so consistent there. I think he is a guy who, while it doesn't always look pretty, will continue to get the job done. It reminds me a lot of Andrew Whitworth early in his career, what they look like. I know Whitworth played a little guard, but just similar stylistically, I think he'll be a good one. I think he has a chance of making this list next year. And the guy who I think is probably going to end up on this list next year that was also a rookie is Jalen Ramsey. Just from what we saw from his rookie year progression, he was another guy who tracked number one receivers there for the Jacksonville Jaguars as a rookie and got better as the season went along. If we could see that natural progression from him, I think there's no doubt in my mind he's on this list next year. He could be, a top 3 type of cornerback next year. Just he has all those sort of tools. Was fantastic down the stretch last year, so we'll see if he takes that next leap.
Yeah, didn't allow a touchdown since like week 10 in the NFL last year. His last 4 weeks were incredible, where he had something in the region. I think it was about 9 pass breakups over those last 4 games. So I think absolutely he's a guy who, we know from college. We saw just how dangerous he can be. You can move him around. You can do some big things with him. I completely agree. He has a very good shot to make this list next year.
One more guy that I'm going to say could be on this list next year that I'll put money on as being one of the most likely to make it. You got any idea where I'm going?
I don't know.
Okay. Myles Garrett. I think Myles Garrett is just the sort of guy who can step onto an NFL field right away and Joey Bosa-esque impact, just start dominating from week 1. I think he has that sort of talent. Am I wrong about this? I know Sam would sit here and say I'm dead wrong about this, but do you think Myles Garrett has that sort of, sort of guys we've seen like Von Miller, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack in recent years, just be able to step on a field and play like they belong since day one?
If he's fully healthy, absolutely. I think the only concern you have with Myles Garrett is that he got nicked up a little bit in his Texas A&M career. If he's fully healthy, if you're a subpar offensive tackle, he's going to flat out destroy you, and he'll destroy you in a good many different ways. So yeah, if he's fully healthy, he's gonna have a great career. Actually, one other guy that I think I should mention there, based on the way he finished last year, and it's the guy who I'm most excited to watch Myles Garrett go up. We might get the next decade of one of the best pass rushers against one of the best left tackles in football. When the Cleveland Browns play the Baltimore Ravens, we're going to get Myles Garrett against Ronnie Stanley. You look at what Stanley did, and there was the game against Pittsburgh midway through the year where he came back. It appears he came back a little bit too early from injury. Got destroyed in that game. James Harrison, I think, took him to school at that point. From that point on was just absolutely incredible, and I think allowed the least pressure in the NFL over the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season. So I'm really excited to watch those two go at it twice a year for the next 10 years if possible.
No, Ryan Stanley is another guy who could make this list with how good he was in pass protection down the stretch. He is so dang smooth. The biggest only concern really I had with Ryan Stanley coming out was that his play strength was, he was just a little weak. He's still a little soft. And over the course of the season, that just got better. I think over another course of a NFL offseason, that will only continue to get better. And so that being my only concern, he could be, a top 5 sort of pass protecting left tackle in the NFL next year, and has a good chance to make this list if that is the case. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of Ronnie Stanley's game. But now let's go to the other side of the ball, the other side of the coin, though, and guys who we think will be most likely to fall off this list, whether it be due to age, whether it be due to the fact that we don't think they deserve to be here in the first place. Who do you think next year of these 50 guys doesn't end up making it?
I don't know if I would flat out say he definitely doesn't make the list next year, but I was a little bit concerned by Joe Thomas in the second half of last year. It wasn't the same dominant play we've come to expect now. Let's just for the record state that Joe Thomas, in the 11 years we've been grading players, is the best offensive tackle we've seen in that span. Just consistently turns in phenomenal seasons, phenomenal in pass protection, really good as a run blocker as well.
I mean, that's not debatable.
Without a doubt, absolutely. But the second half of last year just didn't look quite as dominant as he has in the past. Had the game against Baltimore in Week 10 where he allowed 5 pressures, which is he very rarely gives up that amount of pressure. So I've got a little bit of a concern that at the end of last year we were starting to see the decline of Joe Thomas, and I think if that continues into next year, he's not going to be a guy who's going to be a top 50 player, especially when you've got guys like Conklin and Stanley ready to step up and take the mantle and take his place in the top 5 tackles in football.
Yeah, I'm going to go actually a different tackle. I get that Joe Thomas wasn't the same Joe Thomas in the second half of last year, but he's not getting to the age where I'm actually worried about. I think he's still only 32 years old this year. That's not too old to where I'd expect to drop off and play. Andrew Whitworth, on the other hand, who was 36th overall on our list, switching schemes, going to have to relearn some sort of protection calls, that sort of thing. That's not a huge deal, but, sometimes they want to teach different footwork. Sometimes they want to do a little different stuff that, he's not going to be completely comfortable with like he was in Cincinnati. And then he's 35, and that's just getting to the age where it starts to slow down. We see offensive linemen again and again just sometimes they fall off a cliff. Sometimes it goes and it goes quickly. I think that could be the case with Andrew Whitworth. We already saw his run blocking take a little bit of a step back a season ago. So I think Andrew Whitworth due for a little drop in play. And then another guy who's getting up there in age, Greg Olsen, tight end for the Carolina Panthers. They added a couple other weapons on that offense to sort of, to feature more in Christian McCaffrey, Curtis Samuel. Those guys will get a lot more targets than Olsen, will steal some of Olsen's targets away. And I just think at 32 years old, he's going to slow down a little bit. I don't think he's going to be among that, terribly elite tight ends to where he's going to make the 50. He's still going to be a good player. I'm not debating that, but we're talking about the 50 best players in the NFL. He might not be that again next season.
And it feels blasphemous to be saying this about guys who we know have been really good over the course of their careers, and we've graded them for multiple seasons now, especially guys like Thomas and Whitworth who have been just phenomenal offensive linemen. Another guy I think potentially we could see a drop-off, Drew Brees was only 47th on our list last year, so it doesn't require much of a drop-off from him to drop out of that top 50, and I think age there becomes a factor as well. I know age was the reason why we didn't have Tom Brady at number 1 in this list effectively, and I think there's a good chance that next year we could see Brees just drop a couple of spots. I think he's still going to be a top 100 player in the NFL. I'm just not sure he's going to be top 50.
Yeah, it also doesn't help that they keep trying to trade away all his best weapons. They give him some weapons, then all of a sudden, Brandon Cooks is dealt, and then Jimmy Graham's dealt. They really don't like giving Brees a lot of help there in New Orleans. It seems like. So yeah, that wouldn't be crazy to me to see him have a little bit of a step back and play in next season. Let's touch on though the one topic that I know you wanted to talk about the whole time, and it's, does a kicker deserve to be a part of the PFF 50 or even the PFF 100, or if we went to 300, where would you slot in a kicker? And I know it's not just any kicker. It's your boy, Justin Tucker, the perfect season in terms of one kick that he missed that it was blocked against the Patriots, I believe. Where do you put a guy like that in? Where would you slot him in if you're ranking all the players in the NFL?
I don't think they can be in the top 100. Now, for the record, I put Tucker's season last year when we did our top 101, which is the review of the year. I had Tucker up there, inside the top 20, and that's because, frankly, based on the season, it was the most ridiculous we've seen from a kicker. The problem with where you slot him in the top 100 or the top 50 looking at to the season coming in, it's just so difficult to repeat that year. I mean, it was effectively perfection last year. The odds that he's going to get another 10 opportunities, he was the one of two kickers that saw 10 or more opportunities from 50 yards last year. So that doesn't really bode well that he's going to get the same opportunities to really impress on big 50-yard kicks next year. I still think he's going to be the best kicker in the NFL next year. I'm not convinced that he's going to have that dominant a season because it's just so difficult to do. So if he can go out there and do exactly as he did again, when we're doing the 101, Khaled's going to be getting angry at me once again because I'm going to be banging the table for him to be, high up there and at least making the top 101. But you just can't rely on that, I don't think.
No, I agree. I think top 100's a little steep. If we're going like 150, I could see him getting on the edge of that because just how consistent he has been over the course of his career, how valuable it is to be able to make, 55-yarders at some sort of consistent basis, and that we've just seen that over the course of his career. He can do that, and not a lot of other kickers, and almost no other kickers can. So I think there is some value there, but like you said, it's so hard to rely on week in and week out. That's why drafting someone like Roberto Aguayo in the second round made no sense to us because they're just so inconsistent. It's a position that's difficult to be consistent at. So, yeah, I think you're a little more. That's a little more level-headed take than I expected out of you, Gordon. I'll just say that. Thought you were going to go a little crazy at me.
I mean, when I hang up, I'm probably going to go and cry and feel pretty bad about myself. And
you're going to write him a handwritten note saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, Justin."
Sorry I doubted you. You're still my boy. I still think you're going to kick 10 field goals or 50 yards or beyond. And if he does it, then it's going to be another phenomenal season again. If anyone can do it next year, it's him. I'm a little bit wary.
All right. That's it for the PFF 50 talk. We'll have another review podcast later this week where we talk with, I'm not sure who Sam and Steve are talking to this week in terms of looking back on the PFF history, but we'll have one more of those. I think we're getting into then after that we'll be getting into some grading podcast, how we go about grading certain positions, offensive line, defensive line, all that sort of stuff, college and pro. We'll talk about that on the Late Week podcast. And make sure to go check out our new PFF Edge and Elite subscriptions at profootballfocus.com/subscriptions. We're giving away one every single week this offseason. Last week, the winner for our subscription giveaway was ESP Golden Bear, the Twitter user ESP Golden Bear. Congratulations, you won. You go and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. You will be entered to win a PFF Elite subscription. We're giving away one every week. Go make sure and do that. And also, please, if you guys could, leave us a survey. It helps us. It will help the podcast grow and get more listeners if you go to profootballfocus.com/surveys. As we said before, only 20 seconds will help us out immensely in terms of what we can do for you guys in the future. That is it for us, though. We hope you have a good one. We'll be back next week.